Hello, good evening. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you for being here. I'm Lieutenant Mike Garland with the Police Department. I work with our outstanding investigators and community outreach officers and school resource officers as well. And this is our Youth Mental Health Forum. I thank all of you for being here. We have, I think, a really interesting program, and hopefully it's something that will give rise to future events and discussions of this type, because this topic is just so important. On the schedule tonight, we'll do a little bit of an introduction. We'll talk about sort of what led to this event taking place. And then we will hear from our youth moderator, Lily, who will speak in a little bit, and also some other experts in the area of mental health who will introduce also here, who are sitting on the panel to my left. But thank you all for being here. I'll just share a few things about the origins of this program. The City of St. Louis Park participates in a citywide mental health collaborative. The founding members of the collaborative are the Park Nicollet Foundation, the City of St. Louis Park, and the St. Louis Park Public Schools. Other members: Police Department, Fire Department, Children First, STEP, the St. Louis Park Emergency Program, Community Education, the St. Louis Park Family Services Collaborative that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And that group meets at least monthly to build awareness and align action around mental health and well-being in the community. It is a really empowered group, a group of leaders, the city manager, the police chief, the fire chief, the superintendent of schools, many other leaders from the community get together monthly to talk about aligning their efforts to make our community more mentally healthy. Part of that at a recent meeting was sort of a shared challenge to think about doing something that will benefit youth over the summer as they face a gap between the end of the school year and the start of the next school year, where they may not have quite the same easy access to social workers and people who can help them if they're undergoing a tough time or really feeling the weight of things that confront young people in our community. So that led to this forum, and hopefully some good information will be shared here, some good discussion will be had about mental health in our community, about mental health for youth, about the effects that the worldwide pandemic emergency had on the mental health of young people and lots of other people. And thank you for all being here to be a part of that. So I mentioned our mental health collaborative. It bears mentioning just some of the members of that collaborative who are present. I saw Paul Danisic earlier. Lost track of him in the room here, but and he's not waving either. Maybe he had to move on. And Chief Harsey, of course, is in the back. Margaret Gagnon from Children First. Debbie Wells is here also. And I'm sorry if I'm forgetting anybody else that participates in the group, but thank you all for being here. I mentioned Chief Harsey is here in the back from our police department. He's also joined by Deputy Chief Crewley. Some of your school resource officers are also present. You saw them out in the audience. Officer Gronsky from the middle school is in the back of the room. Sergeant Balvin, who works with the school resource officers. Outreach Officer Ken Sisko is in the back, who many of you probably have met. And Outreach Officer Katie Fitzhenry, who bears much of the appreciation from me and hopefully from you also for helping set up this event. Katie did a fantastic job making contacts, promoting the event, getting all of the resource partners in the back here for their tables, and it was an outstanding job done by Katie. So let's give her a round of applause. The police department started a mental health strategic initiative in 2019 with the goal of leading and partnering with the community to improve mental health. We have a police department mental health work group that meets monthly to discuss our response to mental health crisis and mental health emergencies in the community. Many of the people you see in this room from the police department are part of that group, so thanks to all of them who are here also. That group has fostered new training initiatives for the police department, helped in the process of getting CIT training for an increasingly large percentage of our officers, identified and provided online training for our 911 dispatchers in communicating with people in mental health crisis. That group was instrumental in bringing the Vitals app to all of our officers' mobile phone. I hope many of you are familiar with that as well. That group was instrumental in the initiation of our social worker partnership with Hennepin County, which has also been in place since 2019. In that space of time, we've made, starting in 2009, 108 referrals of individuals to our social worker for contact, follow-up, and check-ins. That number increased to 232 in 2020, to 397 in 2021, and as of today, we've made 101 referrals to our social worker. These are done after our police contacts with people experiencing a mental health crisis or a contact that's motivated by mental health. So I think this is probably a good time to just introduce our temporary social worker partner, Mr. Nils Dybvig, who has been great to have on board. He's serving in a substitute capacity while our usual social worker is on maternity leave, but Nils asked if he could just share a little bit about what he does and his work with the program. So I'll hand the mic to him.
Yeah, hi. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. I've only been working in St. Louis Park for a month or so, filling in for Lindsay Mueller, who's been doing this job for over a year and is planning to come back after her maternity leave. But I really applaud St. Louis Park. They were one of the first cities to get on board with the partnership between Hennepin County and the police departments to have a social worker in the department. When I get referrals from officers, oftentimes they're out in the community and they see somebody who can use some more support. And now they have a resource. They can send a referral to me, and I can follow up with them, and I can see, what kinds of support somebody might need, help them get connected to resources in the community or through Hennepin County, help them, get connected with, maybe they have resources already in place. Maybe somebody is having a mental health crisis, but they already have a case manager, or they already have, a support person who is a help to them, but maybe doesn't know that they had a contact with the police. And so just kind of helping to communicate what's going on with the person so that they can have so that everybody can be aware of what's going on in the situation and the best outcome can be made. I'm available to take referrals for adults and for youth, for people of any age who are going through a mental health crisis or who are looking for additional support, whether it's mental health or whatever somebody might need, whether they need health insurance, whether they need help getting connected to therapy or a doctor. Whatever kinds of resources are available, or if they're just looking for information, I'm happy to talk to people. So if there are people who need that support, officers have a resource that they can refer to quite easily. Anything else? Any questions or?
Questions for Nils about his work as a social worker in our police department? Thank you. Thanks, Nils. You can never say thank you enough and never give enough acknowledgement. When I started out, I forgot to give thanks to our Police Multicultural Advisory Commission members who are present. If you want to just throw your hand up and be acknowledged by the group. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. And then I saw one police advisory commissioner as well who was present. Commissioner Tuzana is there, and it's a pleasure to work with her in monthly meetings of the Police Advisory Commission. I mentioned our citywide mental health collaboration partners. I think I see Derek Reese there next to Deputy Chief Crewley. He's the Executive Director of STEP, and it's really nice to have him here as well. Thank you, Derek, for being here. Moving on in our program, we have been really fortunate to have I'm not sure if we should say youth moderator or youth special guest here, but to my right is Lily Jamsa, and she is a student at St. Louis Park High School. And yep, she's not shaking her head no, so I'm getting that right. We rode up in the elevator together, and Lily said she didn't remember me and didn't think she had met me before, and I said there's nothing wrong with that. I said, but I did remember her because I gave her a ride home one time and talked to her mom. I don't remember the circumstances. It certainly wasn't a bad thing, but it is great to have her here in this capacity. And Lily has been good enough to give a little introduction about herself and share a little bit about her experience as a young person and perhaps confronting mental health topics. So please give a hand for Lily Jamsa.
Well, hello everyone. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, I'm a senior at St. Louis Park High School. I identify as a white Native American woman. I'm 18 years old, and the first time I realized I probably had some mental issues up there was when I was in middle school, and I was like constantly really like worried about things that I shouldn't be worried about, which is like anxiety. And it was because I was coming from like a different school, and the kids at the school were like, they were just really mean to me, and I didn't know why. So like that obviously made me insecure, and everything after that, like I dyed my hair, I did everything I could to like try to fit in with like the new school I went to, which was like predominantly white kids with blonde hair and blue eyes, as I look right now. And I don't know, it's impacted me in a way where like my entire life I've tried to be somebody who I'm not, and I'm still trying to deal with that and like constantly make people proud, because there's a lot of pressure on me for that, like breaking the family, I don't know what you would say, but like breaking the family spell, how like everyone is like constantly failing, and like now there's like one kid in the family who's not failing. And yeah, so I've suffered with anxiety really badly, and that started in middle school, and there could be some other things too. Haven't gone to a psychiatrist in a long time, but yeah, that's something I've suffered with, and I try to cope with a lot. I sometimes have panic attacks where I think I'm gonna like die for no reason, which is something that happens a lot to people, and it's something really hard to deal with because it can happen anytime, and usually it's caused from anxiety, but they're two different things. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And now, yeah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks very much, Lily.
Yeah.
Again, you can never say thank you or acknowledge enough. So many of you who are coming in saw the table of Shout Out Loud in the back. And their event takes place in St. Louis Park annually, right? And is an amazing way to raise awareness about suicide prevention. So please see Shout Out Loud either when you exit and get information about their event, how you can participate, and how you can help out their important cause. And thank you for being here as well. Next part of our program, like Katie was so kind to indicate, is to move on to introductions for our panelists. And we have been really fortunate to have the ability to call on some of these experts that work in the field of mental health, are extremely knowledgeable about mental health, and especially as it pertains to young people, and to send out emails, make contacts, and have this size of a group of experts be willing to be here on a Tuesday night is so wonderful. And I just want to say thanks to you all. I think your mics are on. And then maybe we'll start on the right. And I see Wendy. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, I am Wendy Klute, and currently I am the middle school counselor in St. Louis Park. So I'm the only counselor for 1,000 students, so it's very, very busy. And prior to being a counselor, I was actually a police officer in Edina and then also in Eden Prairie. Then I stayed home and raised my kids for 12 years, and when I went back to work, I decided I wanted to go into the schools to make a difference, and it's my 9th year of being a school counselor.
I'm Katie Metcalf. I am the director of clinics in our domestic abuse programming at Lee Carlson Center, which is a nonprofit that we have 4 clinic locations, but we just opened our clinic here in St. Louis Park in October. I have worked for the majority of the time that I've been a therapist with people who are court-ordered or recommended to see me. And so that's kind of where my passion lies, is being able to provide services for people who might be involved in the legal system or who might not otherwise be able to receive services or have access to them.
I'm Katie Rudek. I'm also with Lee Carlson Center for Mental Health and Wellbeing. I'm the director of school-based programming at Lee Carlson Center. I'm also a therapist and clinical supervisor, and I've spent the majority of my clinical experience working with adolescents.
I'm Ida Holdall. I'm a clinical mental health counselor, and I work in the schools in St. Louis Park, actually. So I'm at, right now, the Spanish Immersion School, and then at Susan Lindgren. And so, yeah, I'm with Relate, and we have clinics in Eden Prairie and Minnetonka. So do outpatient, family work, but I work in the schools kind of with those kids that maybe would have a harder time accessing services if it wasn't at schools.
Hello, my name is Tyrone Patterson. I'm a supervisor with Hennepin County's COPE Mobile Response Team. Been there for about 4 years as a responder and supervisor. My background, I worked in child protection before, special needs adoption, and last for about 10 years at the VA as a therapist. So I have most of my experiences with veterans coming home from war, and this is a good topic for me because I also have I have some mental health challenges myself from my time in Iraq. So this is a good topic for me, and I continue to serve in the reserve, and it's just so with the COVID pandemic and with all the challenges we have today, you just see it spike in the military as well too, suicide.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sean Reardon, and I am the Director of Outpatient Mental Health for Park Nicollet, just down the highway. It's our main building. I'm sure many of you know about that building. I'm also a psychologist. I see a few patients these days because my director job takes up most of my time, but we have a team of about 165 people. 110 of them are providers, about 30 to 32 prescribers, psychiatrists and nurses, and then about 78 or so master's level therapists, psychologists. We also have a couple of developmental pediatricians and some speech and language therapists. So it's a rather large team. We have the main offices in St. Louis Park, and then we have a team of about 14 clinicians in Maple Grove and about 14 in Burnsville, and then 8 or 10 other therapists scattered out in primary care and specialty care. So We, as everybody is saying, during the we were busy before the pandemic, by the way, but during the pandemic, we've been incredibly busy, and our team treats about 38 to 42,000 patients a year, so we're plenty busy. Glad to be here. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for those introductions. Really appreciate you all being here. Again, it's going to be really interesting to hear your thoughts on any audience questions and on some questions we've prepared to kind of stimulate discussion here in this forum. And I'm going to look to my partner. Do you think we should throw it open for audience questions to start with, or?
I think we can start with our pre-camp questions, and then we'll just kind of have audience questions as they come in. And I'll say too, a lot of these questions that we have for pre-camp questions came from our students at St. Louis Park here, or past cases, or social workers brought us these questions. So they weren't just something we took out of the blue, they actually have some meaning behind them.
Okay. Lily, are you able to help with throwing out some of the questions? And then I'd
Yes.
suggest maybe if panelists, if you have a response, maybe just throw your hand up and I'll help make sure everybody gets to say what they want to say. All right. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, I'm going to take it away. The first question is, what are warning signs for mental health crisis?
Sean, you've got your hand up. What are some
I'll take a stab at it.
warning signs for mental health?
Well, first of all, I'd say I'd encourage us all not to let it to get to the crisis proportion, because then it's more difficult to manage. I would say the key you need to be attuned, you need to be attentive, which every parent and teacher and coach is, but it's a dramatic changes in behavior, attitude, emotions, motivation. So when you see individuals not doing the things that they're normally interested in doing, not taking care of themselves from a hygiene perspective, changes in eating habits, changes in sleeping patterns, not wanting to hang out with their friends, again, not finding any enjoyment in life, making decisions that are uncharacteristically impulsive of them, any type of, having mood swings, sudden mood swings. What you're looking for is dramatic changes in functioning and behavior that are just uncharacteristic of that individual. And it could be, again, relationally, it could be their moods, it could be their thought processes. Maybe they're not concentrating, focusing as well as they usually do. They're not as organized, they're not, doing their work or their job or their schoolwork as they normally do. So anything that signals like something's happening, something has changed inside this person is what you really need to look for, I think, in terms of, is something going on, in the mental health realm.
Got a kind of a follow-up question to that one, and maybe you have an answer to this or want to speak to this, or anyone else on the panel. Let's say you live with a young person and maybe they have a diagnosis, they have depression, something like that. However, they're doing well, it appears, but they vocalize a need to get some kind of immediate care or urgent treatment. Is that something you should just kind of wait and see on, or how should you respond to kind of an unexpected but maybe not crisis level request for help?
I do have a response, but I'll let other people jump in.
I can go ahead. From a school standpoint, that happens frequently when kids express that they want help, and then I'll talk to a parent and they'll say, oh, they're just overreacting, or oh, she's kind of dramatic, or, so I've had to encourage parents to, take it seriously, and because they're asking for help, it might be a good idea to go in either for a full eval or at least to the pediatrician to get a screening. So it does take cooperation from a caregiver, and we have to be diligent on keeping up with that, because as we know, a lot of the parents have their own mental health issues and don't have the wherewithal to make the right decisions for the kids at all times. So then, we can sometimes reach out to other caregivers to try and help facilitate the process.
And it might seem sudden or out of the blue in that moment, but it's possible that is just how long it took the young person to say something out loud and reach out for help. So they may have been thinking about it and building up the courage to reach out for a long time, and it's not new for them, it's just new for others to hear about it.
And I think it's important to focus on meeting that child, adolescent, where they're at with empathy and compassion, like both of you guys were saying, right? Of just that listening ear and recognizing that, yes, this might be the first time that they say something out loud, but I don't need to blow it off or just assume it'll pass because they're a teenager, that I can sit with them and be in it with them, and that's okay. And I can provide them with support and, just be with them through this. And that's going to be like the first step and one of the most helpful things for kids.
All right, thanks for the responses. The second question is, what does it mean when someone is diagnosed with anxiety or depression?
Kind of a broad question. Yeah, it varies depending on the individual that you're meeting with, and that's why we have criteria that we follow in the DSM. Everybody's depression or anxiety is going to look different. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. But, like Sean was talking about, that like lack of interest in things that they previously enjoyed, feeling down or isolating more, changing sleep patterns, eating habits, concentration, all of those things kind of fall in that depression category, and then how it presents within each client can be really different.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the gist or the origin of the question was, but as Katie said, essentially what it means, as she mentioned, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, is that they are demonstrating or reporting a cluster of symptoms or functional impairments that we have called depression or anxiety, basically. And all the things that Katie just said were pretty much in the depression realm. The things that Lily was talking about are in the anxiety and panic realm. So it's essentially that they have come to a professional and have reported symptoms or functional impairment that just happen to cluster around what we know or what we think of as depression or anxiety for a period of time that are impairing them, as I talked about in terms of watching for impairment and changes in functioning.
And just to piggyback on that, yes, a lot of times the signs, we can see them by all those things that you talked about, but some people are really good at hiding them too. So I just think we have to be cognizant of, all the little things and not just look, like for me, I can often tell if the grades start plummeting or attendance. I mean, those two together. But there are some students that we find out are really depressed and they are rocking it at school and their teacher's like, oh, I would never have known, So it's, again, not a one size fits all. So we do all just have to work together to be cognizant of, go ahead.
I love that you brought that up because I think that's the trickiest thing of all. Like, if you think a conversation doesn't need to be had with someone who is rocking it and is with their friends and getting good grades, and then all of a sudden they just snap. And there were no warning signs. That's what's,
Well, this is kind of jumping ahead in the questions, but I think that also promotes the idea that we just have to take the stigma off mental health. So it could be a friend that says something. I have a student where a teacher's like, she's just a little off, can you check in with, because he just could see something. And so I did, and then talked to her and found out all this stuff, and then called her mom, and her mom's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And so if this teacher wouldn't have, tuned into this, and same thing, so for friends to just realize that, you go to the eye doctor, you go to the dentist, you go get your mental health check. It's just part of life, so that we do have as many eyes on the kids or adults as possible, because it doesn't always show in outward signs, but I think by taking away the stigma, then people don't have to feel ashamed to hide it.
And providing education for students as well of what does it mean if you are having panic attacks, or if you're having difficulty concentrating, or if you notice that you're isolating at home but your grades are killer and you're captain on the football team and whatever, but like something feels off within you, what does that mean? And again, taking away that stigma internally too, so that they can reach out and ask for help.
Again, I think it's just be attentive, notice things, be curious, you know, even check in. And I know everything seems to be going well. How is it going, really? How's it, you know, I mean, sometimes that's an okay question.
And really understanding, like for parents to understand what are some symptoms and signs for mental illness. And that can go a long way because they, like you said, because you're being observant and you can notice the changes in behavior or sleep patterns or eating patterns. So.
Let me just Phil Donahue with the microphone over here.
Do you find the norm, though, is that when you ask a kid, is everything okay, that they're going to actually talk? That they, if there's something deep down that is wrong, that they're just going to freely just start opening up and talking to you? And if not, and you have this kid who doesn't say anything, like a lot of boys, well, how do you go from there? And is that not just a clear red flag?
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know if anyone else wants to say. I was going to say, I have those silent people in my offices sometimes. And I think sometimes it's like reading their body language. Like we know so much of what we communicate isn't even with our words. And so I think sometimes it's like holding space with people and allowing them to be there and be present. But when I see clients, I always say like, hey, my first job is to make sure that you're safe. So if we know you're not safe, we're going to take that seriously. And what that means, we like start with like a safety plan right away, just like right out of the gates. And then I think sometimes it's like doing movement things, or sometimes I'm like, okay, music. And sometimes it's like trying on a bunch of different things to be like, okay, students that want to sit on chairs, students that want to lay on the ground. I feel like it's like, I think it's helping them have space of like, what do you need to do to be like comfortable here so that it can be a space for you? And for sure, I think there are people that come in ready to talk. They're very verbal. And then there are people that come in there. Sometimes if you're so anxious or so depressed or so like triggered from trauma, you can't be online verbally. So I think then it's like helping connect with them, create safety, soothe, join with them before you even start problem solving. So, yeah.
Got a question in the back here.
It's not really a question. I really like the idea of safety plans. However, we all have to acknowledge that suicidality looks very similar to typical teenage behavior. So with that, asking the question, are you suicidal? Have you heard about suicide? Have you thought about suicide? Is this something you know about? Have you researched it? These are the questions that we have to ask our children. It is statistically proven that if you talk to them about it, that they're not more likely to complete. They're less likely to complete. So these are conversations that absolutely need to be talked about between parents and therapists, social workers, teachers, everybody that has a buy-in and a care for students and youth.
Thank you. Any follow-up from the panel to that comment?
I agree.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah, asking the direct question is very important.
Yep.
And I think like the continued check-ins, and it's like the weeks where they like come in and seem fine. It's like just continuing to check in and be like, hey, we're gonna just like check in and track with you. So.
And some things from my experience, when my parents would ask me if I was okay and I wasn't, I wanted to just say I was fine because I didn't want them to think that they were doing something wrong to make me suicidal. Like, because if I did tell them that, then they would feel like they weren't doing enough. And I would never want my parents to think that they weren't doing enough because they've always done more than enough for me. So it's like, asking that direct question is really important, but it's also like scary in a child's perspective, because if you do tell them the truth, like your parents can react in so many different ways. And I think that's a whole nother topic that we could talk about all day, is like parents even reacting to how your child like is either not okay or is okay. And yeah, that's my personal experience from it.
Yeah, I think for parents, the most important thing is to just stay regulated so that you can help the person that you're trying to talk to be regulated and be feeling safe enough to talk.
All right, moving on to the next question. Thank you. Explain any recent trends or common themes you have seen in the last few years in regard to youth and mental health.
At the school, social anxiety, it's COVID, did a number, and they don't know how to function with groups. They don't know how to function with peers. I mean, with missing 2 years of their, very important years of growing up and then being thrown in. I don't know. It's just an interesting thing to see how the kids, they can't be, like the lunchroom, traumatizing, the noise and the hallways and just the amount of 504s and IEPs and special this and that because kids can't function. I mean, it's sad. But we're working on getting everyone back on track, and I hope it, next year will be easier, and the next year will be easier, and hopefully COVID will go away. But yeah, hands down, social anxiety.
We noticed a lot of trends in the amount of cyberbullying and the internet. Social media is a great invention, but it's also an awful invention because kids are mean to each other, and especially when you look at the LGBTQ population, and kids don't know how to cope with that, or that's where the stigma comes and they shut down. So really monitoring your children's social media accounts is very important. So.
I've got a little bit of a follow-up to that one, and that it does kind of go to one of our prepared questions, talking about the effects of social media on development and mental health. And certainly Mr. Patterson explained some of the negative ways social media can affect young people. Are there positives in social media as we try to have a mentally healthy community and mentally healthy youth? Any of you aware of positive impacts from social media, benefits, other than basic communication maybe?
I think for some of my students who need connections, but it's not the kind of, I would rather they have in-person connections, and I think that also just keeps fostering the idea that they have the connections that are at a distance. So I guess it's a double-edged sword, but at least they're connected to someone somewhere, but it's not like a real friend, or I don't know. So for the most part, no, I think schools would be well off without the cell phones and computer use, but I know that's not reality. So we're trying to navigate responsible use and not let what goes on outside of school come into school, because it always does. And the teachers are having a hard time monitoring the computers because the kids are so savvy at pulling up tabs, and by the time they walk around, the game is gone and the work's up, and then they walk, it's just a lot to handle. So again, just teaching personal responsibility, that students know they're at school to learn, and that stuff can wait till later. I see you laughing, Lily. You know the game.
I guess I have a bit of a different perspective, especially for children and youth that are like in more rural areas, or clients, kids that might be in like an LGBTQ population that might not feel like they have the resources within the environment that they live in. I think about like how it's been, 10, 15 years that the VA has been using like telemedicine to serve rural populations. I know social media is very different than that, but it has done wonders for people that are in those rural spots that otherwise don't have a chance to get the resources that they need. And it can be helpful for families and kids to connect with resources. So like we have a social media presence at Lee Carlson Center. Right now it's a lot of like pictures of our dogs, especially mine, and like just, you know, our community activities, but it gets us out there so that if kids are scrolling on Instagram or something like that and they see something about, you know, suicide prevention pop up or, you know, individual therapy at your school, that at least opens the door for them to be able to access those resources in a way that they might not otherwise.
I feel like I've seen statistics that when social media and like more than 50% of the population had like mobile devices that could get online in their hands, that's when we saw anxiety, depression increase. But I think it's like, okay, there are really good things. I feel like the problem is like setting the limits around it is like, it's a good thing, but like, it's just like ice cream. Ice cream's good, yes. But if you eat like a gallon of ice cream for dinner, you're not gonna feel good. And so that's what I talk about with students, like, okay, how do you set healthy limits on it? How do you like keep it away from bedtime so you are like protecting that? Because that's what I think I've seen a lot of it, like, oh, it like swings into like late in the night. And if you aren't getting like good regular sleep, which makes me sound, I sound like how my parents talked to me when I was in high school. If you don't do that, I'm like, we just see mental health deteriorate rapidly. So I think that's the piece. It's like, it can be a mixed bag, but if it's like at midnight on your phone, I'm like, it's never going to be positive for anybody. So.
There are a lot of apps that are aimed at improving mental health. At least that's their purpose. I think the pandemic emergency led to a lot of those coming on scene, but I see a lot of those popping up in my social media feeds. Any experience with them? Any benefit from services that are delivered via app for young people? Any experience with those?
You know, personally, I have some apps downloaded on my phone, and I use that. The VA has put together a lot of different apps where you can do self-help, or you can follow up on your cognitive process and therapy. Or and when I go out in the community, I try to pull out my phone. I say, I know you have a phone. Okay, pull it out. This is a good app that you can try. You know, so you know, because kids are on their phones all the time, so downloading those apps would be a benefit. But those apps are, you know, even like a breathing app, learning how to breathe when you're to calm down. They can walk you through that. So I think the apps are a great benefit. And that's one thing I like about technology.
We use the Calm app a lot in our domestic abuse program, which is primarily with adults, but it's usually their first interaction with any kind of mental health services in their life. And a lot of them think that it's kind of silly at first to sit and breathe in a room with a bunch of other people staring at you. But the quantity of people that tell me by the time they leave the program that they've downloaded the app and they look for those videos on YouTube that I show them, and it's just outstanding the number of people that follow through with those things. So I agree, there's some really great ones out there.
And I think it's the way they market it too. If you take away the stigma by saying mental health and saying, oh, this is a breathing app.
Yeah.
You know, kids will buy into that, and adults and as well. Just taking away that stigma and using that. Instead of, I know we changed at the VA, we changed the language from the suicide hotline to the crisis hotline, just for more people to erase that stigma. So just to changing the name sometimes, so kids will be like, oh, this is a cool app, instead of this is mental health. So.
I use a lot the app called Down Dog. They like said during COVID that you could have it for free if you were out of school. So I was like, great, free. And I love it because you can like, I will have students, you can like set the time and like decide if you want it to be intermediate or advanced or beginner. So I'm not very good at yoga, and it like walks you through it, and you can go fast or slow, and so you can just like adjust it. And I think those times when it was hard to like figure out, I'm like, oh, you like need to move your body, especially for if you're falling into depression. That's important to getting back to a place of calm and regulation. So there's a lot of other exercise apps, but that one's just really user-friendly.
I mentioned at the start about our work with the Vitals app. This is, for those of you that don't know, an app that subscribers can use to communicate information to medical responders, law enforcement, and others if they're in a situation maybe where communication isn't possible or they always have difficulties with communicating with officials. This allows this information to get to our officers and maybe get needed information from someone that because of the circumstances can't communicate it effectively. Have any of you had experience with the Vitals app or used that at all?
Never heard of it, but I haven't used it.
Okay. Well, in the back, go ahead.
Great resource.
In the back says it's a great resource. There's information, you can go to thevitals.app.com, but we use it, all of our officers have it on their phone, and it has the capability of alerting when a subscriber is nearby that may have emergency public safety information to communicate if they're in crisis or need help.
Next question, thank you. What role do early life experiences or adverse childhood experiences, in parentheses ACES, play in mental health challenge?
So much. I think the statistics are that 1 in 3 adults' mental health diagnoses are tied directly to ACEs or something like that. So, or that I've heard statistics that if they could be prevented, 40% of adult depression would be eliminated. And so, just really significant. I think working in elementary schools, it's definitely something that I work am looking for closely when we're screening for clients and making referrals. But for people that don't know, because I threw this out in a training to St. Louis Park earlier, because I did a trauma training, and they were like, we don't actually know what that was. And I said, oh, I should not use acronyms. But adverse childhood experiences are basically it could be domestic violence in the home. It could be basically it's I feel it's thinking about the attachment relationship being disrupted, but it can be a lot of different things. It could be instability of housing. So just those hardships, and a lot. There are things that probably everyone in this room has experienced one of those at some point in time. But I think, as they begin to pile up, it's just the stress of that can affect the brain, and if there's not healthy coping modeled or people that are safe, it can just lead to mental health outcomes. So it's a major thing that we look for. I'm sure you guys do too.
And the more that you have, the more experiences you have, the more likely it is that it's going to lead to some sort of mental health or chemical health issue. Some people are really resilient to one ACE, many people are, but once you get up to 2, 3, or 4 in your life, it becomes much more difficult to overcome the automatic trauma reactions and reflexes to things that are happening in your life. It basically primes your system to always be on high alert and in survival mode when you don't necessarily need to be. And it's a hard way to live, obviously, so that's why it promotes there's all sorts of, bad outcomes of ACEs, including higher rates of, medical problems, poorer academic and occupational achievement, difficulties in relationships, higher degree of mental health and chemical health issues, and ultimately for some people even shortened lifespan, unfortunately. So there's nothing, it's very, very challenging and problematic, and obviously the earlier you can see it, address it, do something about it, the better, because children who have ACEs become traumatized adults if they don't deal with it, and that's what we see. I have clinicians, that's all they see is traumatized adults, and trauma could have been last week or it could have been 55 years ago. So it's really, really really, really a challenging phenomenon. And an important one, like you said, to recognize and intervene with and take very seriously from a trauma-informed perspective.
To bounce off of that, I know I talk about our domestic abuse program a lot because that's where my passion lies. But being able to use the ACEs, talking about that, providing psychoeducation on what that means, what those things are, you know, if it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, incarceration of a family member, substance use, suicide of a family member, parental death. Those are just some of them. But being able to provide them to adults that are then parenting children is a really powerful experience because it helps break that generational cycle like you were talking about, right? Of, again, a lot of the people that I work with will say, I never knew that this was a thing, and now it makes sense for me. And gosh, I don't want anything like this to happen to my kids. And so how can I be the parent that they need to be and provide them with the support that they need so that they aren't 40 and a traumatized adult that is seeking services so that I can help prevent that as a parent has been really helpful.
All of our officers in the police department have had training on ACEs. It's incorporated into some of our policies. Our trauma responsive policing policy, for example, is intended to make sure officers acknowledge and are aware of the effect of adverse childhood experiences. And again, the theme of giving thanks, Officer Forsman, who's in the back, helped develop the training that was given to officers as a part of our mental health work group. So it's an important part for us, even in the policing field, being knowledgeable about that.
Thank you. Next question is. Just kidding.
All right, hang on, Phil's coming over.
Phil's coming.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, for the elementary age kiddos, what's the best way to talk about mental health and the importance of it? I know my 8-year-old has struggled, not so much himself, but with the classroom environment. A lot of kids are struggling post-COVID with emotional regulation, so there's been tons of disruption in the classroom this year, and he's frustrated at the constant disruption, and we've had a lot of conversations about it, but any suggestions for how to explain to him how his peers are struggling and how he can better manage that?
Thank you.
I was going to say, I feel like, that seems like such a common story that I hear. I see the kids that are the disruptors, and then I see the kids that are bothered by the disruption. And I think it's like, okay, when hard things happen, we all experience it differently. Like, if we just took like, okay, COVID happened, everyone responded to that differently. And so our stress response doesn't always look the same. And so for some kids, they get really still and really quiet, and they're going to be like, I'm the most perfect student I possibly can be. For other kids, it's like they just like can't even contain themselves. And so how they're managing that like feeling in their body is that they have to move. It's like, I literally can't sit still. I need to move. Sometimes I'll I'll just say, I think we need to have compassion for other people experiencing and expressing what's going on inside their bodies in a different way. And I think, gosh, in the midst of all this, I feel so much for teachers of like, how do you help a student who's, has big, loud behaviors, and then a student that's maybe more quiet and maybe more anxious. And I think that's where it's like we're working with them to help to meet all those needs. But that's how I talk about it with kids. So like, hey, when something hard happens, like even in your family, people respond differently, right? Like if dinner's really late, everyone responds differently to that. And that's okay. We can be okay with the fact that we respond differently, but what can you do for yourself to help yourself get regulated? And so like, can't control other people, I'm like, even your teacher can't get them to all be quiet at the same time. So what can you do to help yourself at those times? And can you take deep breaths? Can you like have a squishy that you can squeeze? Can you take a walk and drink water? So those things that like are inside your circle of control. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, what effects does social media have on youth development and mental health?
More discussion about
Well,
social
I
media?
feel like we kind of touched on this already. But yeah, I just see the negative side effects at the school. And then, of course, I mean, kids know this in their head that people are posting all the good things and everything looks wonderful. We can say that to them, but it's the go-to to look at, certain things and then all of the fighting that comes out of what people say or do, or if somebody was disrespected, or it just circles and circles. At least at the middle school, that's what we're experiencing. I don't know. I would guess at the elementary, it's less.
Yeah, I feel like we see some of it, unfortunately, so early. And I think it's knowing too, like, is this something that's not helpful for you? So even like if you're having a conversation with a student of like, is this something that, like, I'm noticing there's a lot of stress about TikTok. Like, I'm wondering if that's something that's like giving you life right now, or it's like kind of draining life. What bucket would it go in? And would you be willing to like try taking a break from it for the weekend or whatever? But yeah, I think, because I'm like, it is different. And maybe it's like if you can pause or, take a break. I feel like lots of people I know would take breaks from social media and come back online later, knowing if it's serving you or not. And what is it replacing? Like, that's the thing I think I talk about. Like, okay, if you aren't getting outside, you aren't getting good sleep, you aren't moving your body, you aren't connecting with friends in real life or with your family, well, you need to figure out how to do those things in addition to social media. So I think that's kind of the dance a little bit.
Yeah, I know we talked about it earlier, but setting those limits is important. I know they have those challenges that the kids do online. It's just challenging because they have these social media challenges, and it's just really important to set limits and monitor what's going on online. So.
I have something to say. I do agree that it's really challenging, and to touch on like challenges that are actually on social media, there is like certain things like that I've grown up being on social media. Like there would be like silly like games on it where like you would do like a cinnamon challenge and you'd take like a full spoon of cinnamon, and like if you like could swallow it you were fine, but if you couldn't then like you were rushed into the emergency room. It sounds so crazy, but like it was a trend and people actually did it like with their friends and everything like that. So I agree, and I think it's like dangerous to an extent, but again, from like my point of view, I also agree that there is some good things to it, because some things I learn on social media are really like valuable because they're not even things that a teacher would know or tell me in school or that aren't on the news. Like for an example, things that were happening in Ukraine, you didn't really see much, but like a white perspective lens on that from Fox 9 News. But when I go on TikTok, there's like people in Ukraine who are actually posting stuff and like trying to educate people across the world on what's like actually happening. So I do agree that like it's really challenging, but it's also nice.
Yeah, and I see the good and the bad, more the bad, but but I see the good too. I just went out on so many mobile responses for children that they research how many Tylenol or Advil to take to complete suicide. When that stuff is online, I know how to build an IED, intermittent explosive devices online. So it's just when people are using the internet like that, I'm serious. I like social media.
No, I'm with Tyrone. I think there's good things with everybody, good things about social media. But I think what Tyrone's talking about, there's some very dangerous propositions out there for young kids to try, like life-threatening, not necessarily cinnamon, but take a gun and do some things, or take chemicals that are clearly toxic to the insides of your body. There's some very, very dangerous challenges out there, so that's where it's not helpful. And some people don't have the presence of mind or the good judgment to know I probably shouldn't eat Tide things that we put in the dishwasher, but if it's out there and people are doing it, maybe I should. So that's where I think it goes off the rails. I agree. There's a lot of good connectivity going on as well, but you have to be careful, I think.
I think as a parent, I have 3 kids, and they're all teenagers, and I feel some obligation to monitor social media. I mean, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram. I follow my own kids and I pay attention to what they're looking at. Any up or downside that you've experienced to, parental monitoring, parental engagement with social media with the kids that you work with?
I always tell parents they should, but I also am a parent of 3, and they're jumping things so fast that I can't keep up. It used to be Vine, and then it was, you know what I mean? So I do my best, but there's always ways around everything. And but I always tell parents to start early. If you start monitoring your 12-year-olds, it's going to be a lot easier than when they're 16 to all of a sudden ask for a password. So start it early. But yeah, I mean, and kids are real good about showing me their phones and telling me, stuff. And so sometimes when I have conversations with parents and let them know, then I think it's a wake-up call. But I've seen my students get sucked into things they shouldn't, and they'll come to me and show me, and so we have conversations about it. But it is dangerous, and there are a lot of predators out there. So.
And caregivers having that transparent communication with their children, that I am monitoring, this is a shared situation, that that can set safety up in advance because they know, and it's not a sneaky, like, trust violating thing, it's just out in the open, and it's a supportive safety piece.
You mentioned taking a break from social media, for a weekend or for a period of time. What are some examples of things to substitute for that? So you're not leaving a vacuum. What do you recommend for parents of young people in the room if you're going to try to pull off a vacation from social media? What are some good substitutes for that would support mental well-being of young people?
I think it starts by having a communication with your kids about what they like to do besides social media, and pull from what they enjoy doing. Because what I might think is fun is probably not what a 16-year-old thinks is fun, and that's okay. But having a lot of different options. One of my classes in a grad program that I was doing a couple years ago asked us to take a break from social media for 4 weeks, and I can't count the number of times I went to my phone to click on the app and it wasn't there, and it was every 5 minutes for the first 2 weeks, just because that's what I grew up with. So I had to come up with things that I could do instead. So for me, that was being outside and spending time with my several pets, and staying busy, staying active, moving my body. And it was amazing what that change did for me when I could have social media back, of then I don't get to do these other things that I like to do, and maybe I do need more of a balance. But I think it starts by having a conversation with kids about, what do you like to do? If we take social media or video games or whatever out of the equation, what are other things that you like to do? Drawing or music or whatever it might be.
In the back. Commissioner, I'll be right there. Go ahead.
So I know that there was mentions of, due to the pandemic, a lot of students being removed from the social environment of being around other students. I'm certainly no psychologist, but I've been doing a lot of recent research on the effects of community and mental health. And so I wonder if you folks that have worked with students, or our lovely student moderator here, could kind of touch on maybe some of the differences you've seen in the ability to cope with certain struggles between students that, have in-person social networks, whether that's they're in a sport or, chess club, versus students that have isolated, and then, maybe also with the pandemic, how students have coped differently without more familiarity with having social in-person interactions.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll comment too, that's one of the downsides that I saw come from online schooling is once we went back to person, then students had the option of continuing online. So if kids were feeling anxious about coming to school, then they would go online. Well, that didn't help. It's just making it worse. They're gonna have to come back someday, or maybe not. I mean, now I know St. Louis Park is starting their own online program, but I don't think that's conducive for the social piece of school. But yeah, plenty of students came out of it fine that are in organized sports and clubs and maybe interactive with their faith communities or neighborhood, whatever it may be. But there are then the other side where the kids are kind of isolated and it just exacerbated their issues.
I think we're really talking about connectedness there, you know, and I'm gapping on the acronym. Anyways, U.S. government research recently in March talked about connectedness and the ability of that to prevent the negative effects that the pandemic had on our society and especially on youth. So they question youth, students about how connected they feel to one another, to their community, to their family. And those that felt that feeling of connection from in-person school or from other connections, less likely to feel depression-type symptoms, 35% versus 53% who didn't feel as connected. Less likely to consider suicide, that's a ratio of 14 to 26%. The students that felt a sense of connection, 14% only considered suicide. And less likely to attempt suicide by a measure of 50% if they feel those connections. So that really kind of underscores the importance and kind of speaks to how serious an effect the pandemic had on young people and on mental health. Any comments on that from your experience? Anything you've seen? Maybe students that you had contact with or young people you had contact with before and after the effects of the pandemic emergency?
I think I'll just say that, and I was at a different school at that time, but when that happened, I thought about the kids that I work with, and I'm like, wow, this school is really the safety net. I was working at a school that was really low income, and most of the students received 2 meals a day there, and I'm like, how are they going to get food? And then parents would come in, and they're like, I'm a single parent, and I, can't go get dog food and bring my kids in because of the pandemic, so am I supposed to leave them in the car? That's not like, you're not supposed to leave your kids alone in the car if they're under this age. So I think it was just, there were families I was like, oh, this is like weighty. And I think there were families that were very connected to their church communities, and that was a huge support. And then they weren't meeting. So I think it was just, I feel like the reality is like schools aren't perfect places. I love the schools I work at, but they're not, they're not perfect. But I think they are like a significant support. And I don't think, with summer coming up, it's like that 3-month gap. But when it's an unending, we don't know when it's ending gap like it was during COVID, I think that was just hard for people to manage instead of being like, okay, a week of spring break. Or, so I think that piece of just feeling like, okay, can we rely, I feel like there's this hesitancy maybe a little bit. So okay, can we trust that you're going to be there for us, or hesitancy to reach out because I think they felt like they need to manage within themselves kind of. But I think in the midst of that, I saw teachers, staff go above and beyond to meet needs and try to reach out and be creative and drive meals to homes. And so it was actually really beautiful to see too, but it's just
I really like that question and how you reference community. To be honest, it's when you get right down to it, we're social animals. Even those on the introverted side of the continuum thrive when we're around other human beings. And that was just shattered. And by the way, I know a lot of adults who have and continue to struggle with the lack of connectivity due to the pandemic as well, just as severely as young people. So I mean, taking away the essence of our socialness, that's incredibly huge. So getting back into a community, and I agree, I think schools are safe havens. They're a culture, they're a place to connect, even if they're only connecting with one friend or one teacher or one coach. That's hugely important to all people, but certainly people in their formative developmental years. So I think that's why it's been really hard and anxiety producing. I think the challenge will be in listening to some people who deal with kids way more than I do, is getting over that hump of the anxiety of now going back into those community environments. So that's, I think, our next challenge.
I'm just looking at it from a numbers point of view with our Hennepin County crisis calls. Before the pandemic, we were averaging about 1,200 to 1,300 calls a month, and now we're averaging 3,300 to 3,400. So since the pandemic,
That's
so
huge.
that's taking adult and children phone calls, crisis calls. So, and that number isn't going down.
No,
and,
not at all.
and you look at staffing at the same time, and it's a burnout.
Yeah.
That's insane. But the next question is, thank you. What can a person say right away when someone shares that they are in a crisis or considering suicide? I think the first thing to say right away, I just experienced this unfortunately, like with a friend, and it's like the first thing I always say is like, I never say it's okay, because in that moment for them it's not okay, and you have to recognize that for them, even though you want to tell them like it's okay, everything will be okay. For them it's not, and you can tell that it's not, and you just say that you're here for them and you're listening, and they know that they have someone that they can talk to, and keep having them talk to you, and like remove anything out of the area that could be harmful, because you wouldn't want them to like grab something unexpectedly if they are feeling suicidal and hurt themselves, and just really let them know that you're there for them and that you're truly listening, because that's really important when you're having suicidal thoughts, is that someone is there and that you know someone is caring about you.
Great answer, Lily.
Perfect answer. Perfect answer. Perfect answer.
Said it all.
I don't know how to follow that.
You said it. Be present, be caring, be supportive, and let them know that they're important.
And
You
just
said it all.
remember too, like asking the question isn't putting the thought in their mind. Research shows if you ask the question directly, how are you thinking about suicide, that actually reduces the risk, because people know you care. So being an active listener and trying to find some commonality will help go a long way. So great answer.
Thanks.
Question over here.
I have a comment, actually. Okay, just some background. I'm 19, just finished my sophomore year of college, so this stuff hits really close to home. As someone who's dealt a lot with mental health, the biggest thing to hear is that you're safe. And a lot of the time, struggling with mental health, you feel scared of your own thoughts, your own emotions, and you need someone there who's stable to tell you you're safe and that they're not leaving you. And giving you the stability that you're not able to find in yourself is huge. And then also having it be something where it's a constant checkup, even if it seems really annoying and just time and time again. But that's where you start seeing progress, and that's where you start seeing where there is fallback in what has worked and what hasn't worked. But it's from a child's perspective, especially telling a parent. It's also scary to tell a parent, and having parents sometimes come back and be like, well, we don't want anything bad to happen to you. It's like, most of the time we don't want anything bad to happen to us either. We just don't know what to do with our own emotions. So safety, that's like the biggest thing, of just even like hearing that we are safe. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and also I always tell my young students who try and carry this weight for a friend that you're a child, it is not your job to, so to encourage their friends, we need to find a trusting adult that can help us who's, I try not to encourage them to keep it a secret, even if their friend is like, don't tell anyone. That's too much pressure. And so then I'll tell the friend if something does happen, you'll always carry that weight that you didn't go to a trusting adult. So.
And it really takes like helping that child or adult like develop that safety plan, and that safety plan should be their own words. It shouldn't be like what you want as a parent or a social worker. It should be like their own individualized safety plan. There's no cookie cutter with that, and it should, you know, something that they will use if they're feeling in crisis or feeling low or starting to isolate. So.
Yeah, I usually talk to clients about it being a living, breathing document. Like, we're going to revisit it. And, you know, maybe it's every time you come into my office, we're going to talk about, okay, did you try this thing on your safety plan? Oh, it wasn't effective? Okay, well, let's put another thing on there to try instead. That it's growing and changing and with you as you move through life, and, you know, things, you might lose interest in some things or be connected with a new community, go off to school, connect with, you know, a church community or whatever it is, that's something that you always get to keep with you. And gets to grow with you, which is kind of puts that power and control back in their boat of like, okay, I have things that actually work for me and not just like, well, I think Dad wants me to say this.
Yeah.
I'm just so I have a child in the middle school, and she's definitely dealing with a lot of the social I mean, when you said that, I'm like, yep, that's it. But she isn't, you know, she isn't needing to go in to seek resources from you. And I'm just wondering, like, I mean, this is such an amazing forum just for this community. And I'm just wondering, like, do these types of things happen in the schools? Like, what types of resources are kids, so kids can start building their own toolbox or their safety plan?
We run groups, so like I used to call it anger management, and that sounded rough, so I switched it to emotional regulation, but the kids they hold on to their anger. Yeah. When are we meeting for anger group? You know, they want it to be called that. So, and then I do an organizational group, and there's also a loss and grief group, stress busters for anxiety. I mean, so we have probably about 8 groups that run, but the students and parents have to both be on board. So it's not, you know, for the whole student body. And they run about 6 to 8 weeks, and then there's a rotation for the next cohort. But as far as, it's tricky because, so at the high school, they had a protest, and the social worker and I got called to help at that. And it was student run, and it was a free-for-all where students were on the microphone talking about their mental health, and all of a sudden they're like dispelling everything to the whole student body. And I'm like, oh dear God. Like, that's just not, anyway. So it's tough to bring it up at schools because kids may tell things that they may not wish everyone would know for the rest of their lives, you know? So there's a balance. I mean, obviously, I think the teachers in health class talk about emotional regulation and all the stresses of being an adolescent in the formative years of growth. But this kind of a forum, I don't think anyway, I'll just stop there.
I think embedded mental health education and preparation is definitely an area of growth for the education system. Just the SLMH, Schooling Mental Health Program, the big grant that we work off of has been around for what, 7 years? And that's
maybe 10.
Maybe 10. And I mean, that's a wonderful starting place to embed therapists in the schools. A lot of times we will do education and training for teachers to help them have the resources that they need and some of the language and skills that they need to support students who might be encountering a mental health concern. But it'd be great to have some embedded, like, social emotional curriculum starting in pre-K, right? Like, what do I do when I feel this way? What is this? You know, what is my body doing? Just really basic stuff.
I just want to say I can talk loud enough. Shout out loud. I think what you're saying is very important, but I think, what's the problem, you guys? Why isn't this happening in our schools? Why isn't there a class that is weekly, that's monthly? Why do the kids have to join a group to be part of this? Why isn't this part of every day? We're 2 survivors of suicide here, so we get angry about this.
where is it and why isn't it happening? Not your fault. That's not what I'm saying. But we're having this forum and we're saying, well, this would be great or this would be great. But it's not happening. And we're going to just continue to keep talking about it, you guys. But where's the help for our kids? And I know you guys are working on that. This is not, I'm not saying this about you guys. I'm saying this, you know, outwardly. We're being very kind talking about this. But where's the help? Because our kids are dying. It's the truth. And second leading cause of death for our children. And we're saying it would be great to have these programs. It would be great to do this. And I'm not someone that's out there lobbying, you know, Congress or working with senators or anything like that. I'm literally trying to do exactly what you're talking about. We need this in our schools, and we need our kids to learn coping skills from the time they're little children and can speak till they're in college and they're sophomores in college and they're seniors in high school. And we need to listen to these two girls that have spoken up because they're the ones telling us how it really is. So maybe a forum like this isn't great in our school for a free-for-all, but getting a panel of children up here of different ages could be very helpful for our community, which is also what we're really about. So I'm sorry to be angry or strong about it, but it's the truth. We can say that it would be great to have these programs, but where are they? And what can we do?
Many years ago,
You know?
I was trying to rally really hard just to get like a program like Mind Up in the elementary school. And it's just an amazing program where kids just can, this is what I'm feeling and this is what it is. And I just think because there is such a stigma and it's just like, well, it's not good to feel not good. So how do you get the message to kids that this is a normal feeling. Everybody feels like this. Not everybody is smiling, and this is how you can, these are some things in your toolbox that you can manage. And it doesn't have to get to the point where they have to seek a counselor or a therapist, but it's just, I mean, I say the same thing. It's just like, you know, we have ed, physical ed, you know, why can't there be some sort of like a mental ed in school?
Absolutely. It has to be a priority of our society.
We do this as a community. Maybe this is an after-school program. Maybe this is something that we start here in our little, small group where everybody is, you know, we're close. We all talk about what a community we are.
But we're not doing this, so we have to, you guys. We're losing kids every day.
And I don't know enough about curriculum and who approves what classes are taught and all that, but so I know it's touched upon in health, and then also in advisory they do, but I think it's kind of surface level, and then they kind of get repeated. Like if they heard the statistics you were sharing and some of the deeper things that might sink in more. I worked at Shakopee School District before I came here, and for them, one of the biggest things that the community pushed was financial literacy. And so, you know, all these kids are going into college and ending up in debt. So it took about 4 years, but there was a huge push, and now every ninth grader is forced to take a financial literacy class, which is huge. So it can be done, it's work, and it just takes people that say why it's important. And again, I'm not sure if it's the superintendent or if I'm sure it'd be a team of people, but that would push it through to say how important this is to make it a required class. And then there's the thing too, like at what grade, because it's not a one grade thing. There has to be like the elementary level and then middle school. It's a continuum.
The earlier the better. I mean, even so simple as like teaching little kids what's happening in my body, and just understanding it. Not even going further than that. You know, maybe what can I do, but.
Learning how to self-soothe.
Yep.
Really
Teaching parents how to co-regulate with their kids, caregivers how to co-regulate.
So I think the question is, how should parents communicate to community leaders, to school officials, to city leaders, to health providers? And it bears mention, I talked in my remarks at the beginning about all of our community organizations participating in a citywide mental health collaboration. One of the emerging goals of that collaboration is to host community conversations this fall and winter about this topic. And with the school superintendent being a member of that group, with the city manager being a member of that group, with officials from Park Nicollet and the Family Services Collaborative and STEP and all the other organizations that are really at the forefront of caring for people in our community, that'll be a great place for people to, again, come together like this and be able to have the ear of those decision makers directly. And I think that'll be a good opportunity, and I'm really excited as a part of that group to have a plan moving forward where people have a forum to say just these kind of important things. So, Margaret, hang on.
Okay. I was trying to hold myself back, but
Margaret from Children First.
Thank you, because this is, I think, really critical. And so I'm just going to share 1 second about what's happening already. So we are in the process, this collaborative, of developing, fleshing out a mental health strategy map. You can look on the website, on the St. Louis Park City website, and see what's there, but there are a lot of gaps. And so we have asked the City Council, both Park Nicollet and Children First, have asked the City Council to invest federal American Rescue Plan Act funds, so COVID recovery funds, in mental health. And so I'm just going to say that I'm going to go ahead and put our stuff up, and maybe Park Nic might want to put their stuff up so that you can see what those ideas are. But we just secured a $250,000 grant from the Minnesota Department of Education to support this work with staffing and with the data infrastructure side, so the evaluation, assessment, making sure that we're doing things that really are, driving change the way it should. But all of this needs to be planned by kids and by parents and by families, community members, so it's a really different way to behave. It takes a lot of investment in building our neighborhood associations, our parents and kids who are maybe less connected to city and to groups and to being as formally, active in the community. So we're really just experimenting and excited about doing this as Children First, because our DNA is connecting with everyone and letting people engage in their daily life to support youth. But this is different, and it's really linked to some metrics, and we're really particularly interested in the release of the Minnesota Student Survey data that will be coming out this summer, and then the comparative data in October. So we'll be hubbing around that, and it'll give us more information, I think, about what we should be looking at. But I just really want to invite you all, if you're passionate, to really advocate for this, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime investment in our communities. It's very hard for city councils, for mayors, to invest in mental health and wellness like this when they've got to backfill budgets. But if we invest a little seed money in acting differently, I think it'll attract investment long-term, new dollars to our community to support this work, and it's never going to happen if we don't do it. So we're really linking arms and taking the work of the collaborative and then fleshing it out more deeply. And you'll see us doing some things like a community-wide, it's a literacy festival for a week right after National Night Out in August, but it's wellness, health and wellness, lots of ways kids can connect and interact. And so just keep an eye on those things. I tried really to be quiet because I knew what Michael was saying was kind of the same thing. But I think you should know that there's a lot of intensive, deep work, and we invite you to get involved.
Thank you, Margaret. Your energy is very, very contagious, and thank you for that. Other questions from? Go ahead, here. I'll pass the microphone down.
I am a sports parent, so I can probably yell. I just had a quick question. What is the percentage of either childhood mental health versus children of parents of mental health? You know what I'm saying? Like, if, like, per se, I have mental health issues myself, but yet I don't want to, give my children the stigma of, oh, well, my mom's got mental health, so that means I'm going to have mental health.
Yeah. I think that's a really good question, because that's just a really good question, because trauma is, passed down. And so, when we're taught that, we think that mental illness can also be passed down. So I honestly don't know the percentage or the statistics of it, but more than often, if a mother or father or two moms or two dads have mental health issues and they don't work on it or have the right coping skills, more than often their kids are also going to develop the same, not exactly the same things, but similar mental illnesses because they see exactly what is presented in front of them and they look up to who is in front of them. And if their mom and dad is just like that, that shows them that it's okay for them to be exactly like that. I don't know if you guys know the percentages or not, but
I don't think there'd be one out there. I mean, there's so many differing factors. I know what you're asking, but yeah, I think because there can be the familial traits that pass along, but then there's also that worry that you're living in constant chaos, and then you start questioning your own sanity and did I inherit this? Or, I mean, I just don't think there is an accurate number out there.
I just think that it would fall under the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, like we were talking about earlier. And it would be persistent, untreated mental health in a parent would be considered an ACE score. But you noted that people are resilient, and so it's one thing is, and then I think we also have to take into account are there protective factors? Are there things in the community? Are they engaged with some sort of community group or a faith or spirituality group or I think those things are really protective. So we didn't really talk about that with ACEs, but I think that's a significant piece. But I don't have an exact number, but I think it would fall in that piece with ACEs of 1, and then if you see someone that has 4 or more, then the likelihood's going to increase. And it depends. I'm then you can I could get into the weeds of certain ones are more, they say passed down, but it just depends.
We have just a couple more questions here. I did just want to jump in on one. Your comments and then your follows made me think of this one. Recommendations at all for young people living with a family member that has mental illness? Recommended coping mechanisms, resources. What can you say to the challenges of being a young person who maybe hasn't yet been diagnosed or doesn't have those same challenges but has an adult family member maybe that has mental illness?
I think it falls back into what you were saying earlier of that what's in your internal locus of control or within your circle of control of, okay, that might be mom's reaction or dad's reaction, or they might be engaging in this. What can I do to regulate? Or what's a healthy person in my life, a teacher, someone at church, a coach, someone I can turn to, and how can I use my own self-talk to manage a situation that I'm in with a parent or caregiver who might be struggling with mental health, in addition to reaching out for help.
I think a lot of things go into that mix. Number one, to understand that it's not your fault, you're not responsible for it, you're not causing it as a child. And also, though, to know that some parents do have very long-standing chronic mental or chemical health conditions that the child is going to observe for a number of years. So it's a balance between accepting that and giving them grace and being as supportive as you can, and finding ways to take care of yourself and get respite and have your own support systems. But it's hard to live with people who have substance abuse or mental health issues because it's very frustrating, it's very aggravating, it can be sometimes threatening and dangerous. But to understand that the best you can do for that loved one is to be there in the way that you can be there, and then take care of yourself in the way that you need to take care of yourself and feel okay about that.
Thank you. The next question we are going to move on to is this is really important too. Every other question was super important, but I think passionately that this one is really important. address how mental illness is seen within different cultures, races, and LGBTQ communities.
That is a hard one
Yeah.
and an important one. High level, there are many cultures that don't even understand what a mental health professional would be. Why we would need people called mental health professionals, because that doesn't resonate. The concept of mental health or mental illness doesn't even resonate in their culture. So, as you can imagine, somebody telling them to go see one of us to talk about mental health issues just does, it's a big leap for some cultures. Some cultures like to think of what we would think of as potentially mental health issues as more of a physiological, biologically based dysregulation that has different interventions. Some cultures would prefer to go to a priest or a shaman or you know, a spiritual healer, and so it's such a big question.
And I think there's a lot of different ways to define culture.
Yeah.
We often think about culture as like an ethnic background or something like that, but there's also culture within like your socioeconomic class or the type of family you grew up in. You know, there's a different experience in growing up in a blended family versus like a nuclear family, or like military is a great example of a different culture. And even within the branches, I have family in the military, so and so recognizing that cultural piece is not just that macro picture. I mean, that's part of it, but also like what does culture look like for each and every person that we meet with. So down to, you know, recognizing that two siblings that are twins that grew up in the same home might experience something different. And so really working with the client at what they identify as important cultural pieces and how that impacts their understanding of mental health and how they move through life and how their family is impacted as well.
Yeah, I feel like actually when I do intakes, I try to assess this with individuals and families. And sometimes people have a hard time putting language even around what culture is. Because I'm like, I want to know about like spiritual pieces, like what you believe the purpose of life is, what does it mean to be doing well and thriving, like social pieces, who are the main people in your life, like how are you connecting, how do you identify in the world, how do you engage with other people, psychological pieces, biological pieces. But I'm like, I think a lot of times they come in and they're like, I don't know. And so it's exciting because we get to like go on that journey together, and there's things of like, hey, what are like the unwritten rules in your family, like that everyone agrees upon and you've never spoken out loud. And so I think those are the pieces of like culture for an individual and that are important. I'm like, as we do work with individuals, of figuring out like, yeah, what would it look like for you to be thriving, you know, and what are all the components of that. So that's why I'm like, this question's so big and broad, but everyone perceives it differently, you know. And I'm like, absolutely, you nailed it on the head. There are cultures that are like, absolutely, I'm never going to. I've had many people be like, I will never go to therapy ever. And people that are super gung-ho about it. So just varies.
Yeah, then like you said, there's a lot of stigma within some cultures also, or some unwillingness to seek help because a provider doesn't look like them, and they probably won't feel like they won't understand, or it's a lot of distrust with some groups, ethnic groups, with the medical profession due to certain studies like the Tuskegee syphilis study. So it's like that's a really tough question. It's a lot of different factors that prevent people from seeking help. So.
It can be generational too, right? You know, one thing I've seen is constantly having to redirect and replace language used by older family members about mental illness, you know, things that were characterized in the 30s and 40s as nerves or those kind of problems, to really put actual names on those things. Do you folks deal with that with students, with young people, having to sort of navigate those generational concerns about talking about mental health?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some parents that are against it. The kids seem to be more open. I mean, I think it's definitely going in the right direction where it's being more accepted to talk about mental health. But yeah, sometimes the parents, and again, depending on the culture and them just not wanting to dive in. And it's just education on their part too. They don't know what they don't know, and it's not familiar to them, so it seems scary.
Yeah, I worked with some parents before, seeing a child in crisis where the mom wouldn't hear that about mental illness at all. And she was like, we just got to go home and pray about it. She ain't praying enough, and but even if school was pushing it, child crisis was pushing it, and the child wanted mental health help, but mom wouldn't hear it at all due to the stigma in the culture, because it's considered a weakness or whatnot. So. So that, like you said, that understanding, but sometimes a parent can be a hurdle due to culture. So,
or the generational trauma that the parents may have experienced, of I went through this, or and I turned out okay, so it's okay that I do this now. That can be a big challenge, and that also, like you were saying, that generational piece can play into the culture that we address with families.
We're kind of coming to the end of our time plan for the event here, but there is clearly a lot more to talk about, and a lot of progress to be made. Part of the idea for this event was to think about resources for young people, options for young people over the summer when they're not in the presence of social workers, counselors, and so forth at school. So I'm gonna put each of you on the spot and ask if you can maybe make one recommendation or tip or suggestion for parents in the room for their young people or people they care about over the summer, and I'll keep talking while you think for just a minute about that. Okay, we'll go right to it. First summer suggestion, go ahead.
Well, Lee Carlson Center, we're offering virtual no-cost parent groups right now and all through the summer as well. Every Thursday, one at 4 p.m. and one at 6 p.m. And they're very easy to get to. You can either go to our website and just click on the link and at the right time, and it'll take you right into the group. Sarah made a QR code, and it's on the flyer on our table. I don't know how that works, but I think many of you probably do. So I would recommend participating in those parent groups. Every week is a different topic, and they're drop-in. So you don't have to come to all of them. You don't have to come in order. You can drop into any one you want and just be ready to participate and find some support, find some skills, and some helpful info.
Now you're clocked out.
I just encourage parents to get their kids involved. And I can't tell you how many kids, and I have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that I work with, and I say, what do you do for fun? Or do you play any sports? Are you in any clubs, any activity? Nothing. I mean, it's like crickets. I'm like, come on. And so then, we go through the talk about how important it is for college applications, job applications, you're more than just school. And it doesn't have to be, if they're not an athlete, it doesn't have to be a sport. They can be in a play. They can go help their neighbor work to plant flowers. They can babysit kids at the park. They just have to be active, because I think part of combating some of the mental illness is, again, being connected to your community and feeling a sense of purpose and belonging. And they'll also make friends. And so much, the age I deal with, the pressure of being accepted and liked is huge. And if they're involved, or in theater, or there's a lot of things through community ed. We're also offering summer school. It's obviously not credit bearing being it's middle school, but it's just another social piece. Some kids come for the social reasons, some for the academics they missed. A lot of kids that need to be there won't show up, so it's just a mix, but it's something where you have to be somewhere at a certain time, make connections with people, you'll recognize some of your teachers. So that's my plug. Just get them out of the house and away from social media.
Go ahead. I was going to say, because I'll just piggyback since I'm in the schools. I'm excited, and I know this is like not for every single student, but we have money from St. Louis Park and from like COVID relief grant, I don't know, ARPA, to do groups, and so we're going to be able to offer groups at summer school and at Kids Place, and so they'll just be like free of charge, and the social workers and those people are identifying them, and we're running like a group on anxiety and a group on big behaviors, big emotions, that anger group, but you know, whatever, big emotions and friendship. And so I think hopefully it's like kids that maybe weren't in, that we're like trying to catch a broader scoop of people. But my other caveat is I'm always like, I feel like right now I'm like, oh my gosh, go outside. I feel like so many of the kids I work with are like nature deprived, honestly. And they just like light up. And we live in Minnesota, but I'm like, they just like light up when I'll take them outside, and they run around and they'll say like, I don't want to go outside, and we go outside for like 10 minutes, and they're just so much more joyful. So to get outside this summer, it's like beautiful. This is why we live in this state. So I
3 months.
yeah. So I feel like I often challenge kids like 20 minutes every day, get outside in your yard. I don't know, dig in, whatever you want to do, but just be out there.
I would piggyback a little bit on both of those. I'll do like a plug for Lee Carlson Center, and then just like a plug for something that you could do outside of like stereotypical services. So we do have a clinic in St. Louis Park. We are offering in-person and telehealth appointments, and so that is always an option. We have a lot of really great therapists at our St. Louis Park location, and I'm not just saying that because I work out of that location. But I also think it's important to talk to kids and for everyone to find creative ways to be connected, whether it's being connected with other people or connected with nature, your community, whatever it is, a way to feel connected and a sense of purpose. We are social creatures, but we also gain a lot from being connected to the world around us. So if that's taking your dog for a walk or digging in the dirt or hanging out with a friend or whatever it is, like finding some forms of connection that, and it might have to be creative, but that's what I would encourage.
I agree with what they all said. I mean, I couldn't have said it better than Wendy. Honestly, everybody's kind of, you see the theme of get out of the house, get into nature, get active. That's super important, and I would just echo that. Volunteer, find a way to contribute, find something that you feel good about contributing to your community or your neighbor or whoever. But get out of the house. Just get away from the devices when you can in this beautiful weather, you know.
I agree with everything the panel has said, but I want to put a plug in for Hennepin County COPE as well. And I always, like, when I went out and did child crisis visits, I always encourage the children to give us a call, adolescents to give us a call if you can't sleep. You know, we're 24/7. We always encourage the parents to give us a call, too, if they're stressing out about parenting or whatnot, or they have their own mental health challenges. But, you know, we, a 24/7 program that offers psychiatric emergency help or through telephone, telehealth video, or in person. So I really encourage, like, and that can be part of a child's safety plan, is like, you know, if they don't feel comfortable talking to mom or dad, you know, talk to someone else, another person who will be non-judgmental and be there to support them. So in our program also offers like short-term therapy, so 30 days of short-term counseling to be that bridge between the long waiting lines to get mental health services. So I just loved receiving, when I was a responder, before I became a supervisor, I just loved receiving phone calls for kids. 14 years old, having girl troubles, or, you know, or mom is taking away their phone, or, you know, so, and just talking through that with them, you know, or if they can't sleep at night, we get calls at 2 in the morning, and, you know, and just talking that process with the child. So I really encourage people to, like, and I'm not just saying it because I work at Hennepin County COPE, but, you know, tell your children about our program and part of the crisis plan, like especially if they don't feel comfortable talking to mom or dad, feeling that mom and dad may overreact if I tell them I'm cutting myself, so.
I just had a question about the summer programs. Is it only offered to kids who qualify for extended school year programming, or is it open to all students? And how, because I know that a lot of times in the schools there's programs, but parents don't even know about them. So how are they open to the broader student body, or?
I think I can for sure take your contact info, but we are offering it to kids that are at summer school and then kids that are at Kids Place, or I think, right, yeah, so, and then working on doing some more groups. So, I love doing groups. I feel like I really wanted to do groups, and I finally got to do some this year after COVID in person, which felt like, yeah, just so powerful. So I think in the schools that I work at in St. Louis Park, there's we really want to do those moving forward. I think that's majorly on our agenda. So I'm stoked about it, and the social workers are excited about it, and yeah, and that's great too, because it's I think the piece of being in a group of other people are also struggling with this. So even if it's a 10-week thing, it's oh, I remember that kid was in that group with me, and that's a source of support. So
You can come take my card.
yeah, come to ask Amanda also the more detailed questions related to that.
I'll just say too, since I'm up here alongside these folks, keep in mind the presence of your first responders in the community. I couldn't be more proud of the professionalism, the communication skills, the dedication of our officers, and the ever-increasing amount of training and experience they have in responding to mental health crises. Our officers respond to those types of situations all the time. They can be a resource. It's an expectation from our chief of police that our officers be knowledgeable, know how to get people help, know how to talk about these topics. These are people that are in your community that are available 24/7, have the tools, have the knowledge to help in the middle of the night when some other services might not be available right at that minute, but we'll be ready first thing in the morning. Your school resource officers, Officer Gronsky, Officer Smith, who's in the back, Officer Ellenson, they are extremely adept at communicating with young people and are a great resource too. So keep in mind that we're sort of can be your first call as well in these situations where you need to ask a question or you need help, and we will always take the time and have the resources to try to help out. So please remember your law enforcement responders in the community as well. Any other questions from the audience? Any final words, Lily?
Always look out for your kids and tell them that you love them. I know that sounds so cliche and cheesy, but it really means a lot. And hearing that that you are proud of them is something that is it's just really powerful. And a lot of kids in my generation thrive to have parents be proud of them, and they're trying so hard, but their parents never tell them how proud of them they are or how much that their parents love them, and that causes a lot of mental illnesses, especially for me when I was growing up. And I wish I would have got told that they loved me or that they were proud of me, and I'm sure that your kids will really appreciate that. It's something so simple, and it goes such a long way, and it's all over the internet. I see it every day, that kids wish that their parents would just verbally speak about how much they cared for them. And yeah, that's it.
Let's give Lily a round of applause. Thank you to our amazing panel of experts. We couldn't appreciate you being here enough. Thank you to Shout Out Loud for being here, and check out their table before you leave and consider taking part in their event. Thanks to the Lee Carlson Center and the Park Nicollet Foundation. Relate and Hennepin County COPE and everyone else here with their expertise. Thanks for being here. All of us from the police department will remain around if you have questions. I'm guessing the panelists will stick around for a little bit as well. And I'll just say thank you to all of you for being here, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.